My name is Leslie Hendrickson. I'm with the Newburyport Literary Festival online, and I'm a longtime friend of the festival. We are using the webinar format here, so you won't show up. The participants are not going to show up on the screen like you do in a meeting. Just a couple more things. This panel is going to last about 45 minutes. Monica's going to be taking questions at the end, and you can write those in the Q&A tab, and we'll monitor that. In the chat, you'll find a link to our website, which has more information about the authors and other events we're doing today and May 3rd. Also, links to our independent bookshops that we're partnering with, the Bookshop of Beverly Farms and Jabberwocky in Newburyport. They have books from all our authors. We encourage you to support them or your local independent bookshop. Thank you all so much for joining us. And now I'm going to turn it over to Monica, who I'm so happy to see. Thank you for persevering through that tech issue.
Oh, wow. So that was a little extra adrenaline rush. Hello, everyone. Welcome, audience members, fellow authors. I feel like I can call you guys friends after knowing you a week already. So my name is Monica Duncan. As you all know, I'm a debut novelist, and we're here today to talk about what this debut year, our first year as published novelist, has been like for all of us. First of all, I also want to add a heartfelt thanks to the Newburyport Literary Festival for creating an event like this that continues to support us as artists during such an unprecedented time. I'm so grateful. And also I want to thank A Mighty Blaze for helping this festival happen and their intense, wonderful, unwavering support of debut novelists right now. So just to give you some background, my novel came out in September, so I'm halfway through my debut year here. And I, along with these three lovely authors I have with me, we're navigating, and I think that's a good word, our first year as debut novelists. It's been an experience like no other. It's been exciting. We've done readings, interviews, book clubs, and I feel fortunate just to have my work out in the universe, really generating some dialogue and, you know, creating feedback from readers. But more than that, I was surprised by the fact that this year has ended up really being all about connecting with people for me. After toiling away in obscurity, all of a sudden we're out there, our work is out there, and we're connecting with people. So now I want to introduce you to the lovely people we'll be connecting with today. First, I have Elizabeth Ames, the author of The Other's Gold. I hope you all have your books somewhere nearby that you can every once in a while. And I have to say, I read all three of these books. They're brilliant. I loved them. I'm so impressed, and I'm in some amazing company. Elizabeth has had works appear in Salon, Literary Hub, and Real Simple magazine. She's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Helen Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan. I also have with me Melissa Duclos. She is the author of Besotted. She's had pieces appear in Salon and the Washington Post. She received her MFA in creative writing from Columbia University, where she was awarded the Guston Fellowship. And lastly, I've got Meghan Flaherty, author of Tango Lessons, our memoirist of the bunch. And her essays and translations have appeared in O Magazine, Psychology Today, and online at the New York Times. She also received her MFA from Columbia University in writing. Can we all take a moment to just say, wow? Yeah, that's what I thought when I sort of was researching you guys. It's amazing. Your backgrounds are pretty stunning unto themselves. So about a week ago, I actually met all of these wonderful writers virtually when we got together to create our promo video for this event. And probably within 60 seconds of talking to each other, we realized that we had something else in common besides being debut novelists. We are all mothers. Some of us really in the thick of it right at this very moment. Some of us actually... Yes, I made her choke up a little bit. Some of us wrote our book with children actually in the house, but all of us are navigating this debut year with, you know, young kids underfoot. And when I realized that, for me, it spoke to the fact that how writing writing is really necessary for all of us. It's not optional, and how important this novel is for each of us. So that said, I want to dive in now and start asking you guys questions. And this one is for all of you. I'm going to start with Elizabeth. But when you got that first call, that moment of like, oh my gosh, I got a publishing contract. This is real. How did you feel?
Oh, I felt so exhilarated. It's hard to, I think some people had told me that might be the moment that like no other moments will, meet. And not that you want to think that everything's downhill from there, but it was just like sheer joy and exhilaration in a way that no other emotions were competing. I was just totally thrilled. So it is nice to think back to that moment and remember the like exhilaration of achieving a dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What about you, Megan? What was that moment?
Same, although I think my kids would probably be mad if I said it was like the one moment, but it was pretty good. I was actually in Ireland at the time, which made it even sweeter. So I went immediately to the pub and had a pint of Guinness, and I thought, there's no getting better from here.
That trumps the Starbucks I treated myself to.
Sometimes a well-timed Starbucks.
Anyways, Melissa, how about you?
For me, it was really surreal. I started writing this book in 2004, and I found a publisher in 2017. And in 2014, I actually gave up on the book. I had gotten 135 agent rejections, I think, and I was just like, this isn't gonna get published. And I moved on. I wrote a whole essay called Breaking Up with Your Novel, like really trying to process that pain of letting go of it. And then a couple of years later, I had a friend say, why don't you try submitting it to small presses? And I sent it out to a couple without even really rereading it. I was just like, I'm done, but I thought my friend maybe had a good point. And 2 months later, I heard from 713 Books that he wanted so I did not know how to process it at all.
Oh, yeah, it's exciting just for me to hear about these stories too. So, okay, not to start on a high and then crash, but the validation was this big deal, but it was temporary. All of a sudden we could start thinking about, I might actually be a novelist. This isn't my first one. This is happening. But after that, and I'll go in the same order. Elizabeth, like, what was the first thing that kind of the worry that crept in, or the fear, or what next? Sales, reviews.
Yes, all of it. I think I'm like low grade worrying all the time, so I feel like it was probably there and just like briefly dissipated due to the crowding in of joy, and then it just like came right back. So yeah, I think I had been warned by friends who had books come out before that like this happening for you wouldn't solve all your problems, and you would still have the same neurotic jealousies or anxieties or concerns as before. And even though I think that's true, but like so many things, you kind of have to experience it yourself before you really believe it.
Yeah, for sure. What about you? Megan, actually, I want to ask you this question because you've got, woohoo, my book's getting published by this major publisher. Oh yeah, it's a memoir. Everybody in the world's going to know all my stuff.
So I just want to echo Elizabeth, your anxiety cycle just creeps right back in. So it's like, yay, oh God, yay, oh God. And it's like that the whole time. I mean, the whole process of getting your work out there at all, like you get an agent, you're like, yes, I've made it. And they're like, oh, but no, I haven't. And then it's like, you sell a book and I made it. No, you haven't. And then it comes out. No, still no. But for me, I think the really terrifying thing was when I realized that I had sold the book at about 60-40 tango to memoir. And my editor wanted it to be 80-20 memoir to tango. So with the book deal came, yeah, but I really need you to dig deep and tell all those sordid tales of the bad men you chose in your 20s and all of your feelings and everything like that. So it got really real to me that it would have to be, there's some math involved that I can't do, but a lot more personal than it was. And I thought I'd written this really, erudite book on tango, but nobody wanted to read it. They wanted to know about my bad sexual decisions.
Yeah. So, having read the book, I do agree with that. I mean, the tango was interesting and beautiful, but I was like, what happened? Oh my God, did she end up with him? And
yeah. And it was like that too with the edits. I got, my editor was wonderful, Naomi Gibbs at HMH, and we worked together extensively. And I was in my aunt's writing bunker in Maine, and I just spent 2 months just like really digging deep and going there and like clawing at myself, and I like spared no punches and just really did it. And then I sent it to her and I went, oh my God, people are gonna read this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And Melissa, what burst your bubble?
It was the realization, similar to what Megan said about, like, you think you're going to get to this plateau and then it's going to be amazing, and then you realize it's not. And the realization that the benchmarks for success are going to keep moving. And I really had to find ways to remind myself that, like, I've already done what I set out to do. I set out to write a novel, I set out to publish it and get it in front of readers, and I did that. And I kept catching myself like, yeah, but a Kirkus review would be great. And then I got a Kirkus review and it's like, but a star would have been, it's like you keep measuring yourself against these arbitrary benchmarks of what does success mean. And it's hard to keep in your mind that success just means writing the book you wanted to write. And I did that. And the sales and everything else is kind of just gravy. But that's like my Zen attitude that I arrive at after a lot of meditating, I guess. But it's not how I felt throughout the last year, for sure.
And if anytime you want to feel bad about yourself, you can just read your Amazon and Goodreads reviews. In case you feel too high on the hog.
Actually, I have a trick for that. If you read these reviews, I find some stunning novel that the universe has agreed is a stunning novel, and then look at their reviews, and they
get the 1-star reviews of like classics.
You know what? Y'all are stupid. I'm gonna go over here.
Yeah. The other trick is not going on Goodreads.
Yeah.
Okay, I can do that. Okay. Anyways, moving on. I feel like I should ask you an easy question now. So this is yes or no. Plot outline. Melissa, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, do you want more explanation, or are we just gonna?
Because I feel bad that you do one and I don't. I'm a no. Megan, plot outline. No. See,
I mean, it was just my life. I didn't really need to outline. Okay. I did outline like which parts of Tango would, like, how to slot through the rest of the hybrid stuff through the chronology of the life. But if ever I needed to know what happened when, I'd just be like, oh, okay.
Okay, so you cheated. Elizabeth.
No outline, like as maybe later grafting one on, but not as I went, really.
See, I felt so bad about it that I said with my next one I would do it, and I did it, and then I'm working on it and not using it, so whatever.
I find so many writers, if you outline, you feel bad about it because it feels like too controlling and you just aren't going with the process. And then writers who don't outline feel bad about it because they feel like they're too freewheeling and not.
We're good at feeling bad about ourselves.
I'm sorry to interrupt this. I just wanted to point to a question in the Q&A that I think you should look at or talk about now, which is someone has asked if everyone could just do a quick description of their book. And so I think that would be great because then they would know where you're coming from. And thank you for letting me interrupt. Excuse me, I'm going away now. Bye.
Okay, really short and sweet. My book is Twine, and my book is really a social commentary on mid-America, shown through the eyes of a very young, poor artist. I like to call my main character a 23-year-old female Banksy. Okay. Megan.
Yeah, sure. My book is my book is Tango Lessons. It's a memoir, so sorry all of you novelists. But it's a memoir about dancing traditional Argentine tango and what it taught me about being a woman and a person in the world. And like I said, it's 80-20 personal and then obscure details about the tango.
My book is called Besotted. It is about 2 young American women who move to Shanghai and fall in love and then treat each other terribly, as people in their 20s are wont to do.
True. Very.
My book's The Other's Gold. It's about 4 friends from when they meet as college freshmen, and it follows them through their early days as new mothers or not. And it's organized around the worst mistake made by each friend during this like 13-year time period.
Nice. Okay, that's important. That's going to help us all going along. Speaking, since we just got your book title, let me jump around with my questions and ask you all. Writers or novelists know this, but other people might not realize that the title that you thought was fantastic, your publisher, editor, or the person that has to sell your book might think is awful. So, can I start with each of you and tell me, Melissa, what was your original title and what did it end up being?
So this is, I think, one of the benefits often of publishing with a small press is that I had a lot of control over, I got to pick my cover designer, who was someone I knew I wanted to work with, and I worked with her on what the cover would look like, and I didn't get any pushback on the title, Besotted. But since I started the book in 2004, it had many, many different titles. I'm horrible at titles. I hate them. At one point, this book was called Sun Salutations in Shanghai, which is just so awful. I mean, I can't even remember the number. I think the most recent one before Besotted, it was called Recklessly, Sincerely, Besottedly Shanghai. So it got better. I'm happy with where it landed, but titles are not my thing.
I love this. Meghan, how about you?
My original title was For the Doubts, which makes no sense unless you've read the book. And my publisher luckily said, hey, nobody's going to know what that means. And also they have no idea that it's about tango, but it's a transliteration of a Spanish phrase, por las dudas. So, like, do you want some more wine? Por las dudas, just like for the doubts. So it was too obscure and we landed on tango lessons. Nice. There were numerous other very florid subtitle things that luckily we talked ourselves out of in the meantime.
Interesting. Elizabeth, you couldn't have started with The Other's Gold.
I did. I mean, I submitted this title, but I didn't start, my own working. I had like random titles when it was a working document, but this was the title I submitted the book under to agents and then, to editors. And I really thought I wouldn't get to keep it because everyone tells you, don't get married to your title. Like, you're never going to get to keep it. And I went in thinking like, I like this title, but I know it might change. And I think I had the advantage of a lot of people with having small children and knowing the Girl Scout song that it comes from, make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver and the other's gold. I always like to sing that song. And
me too.
And that would like stick in people's head. And actually my editor told me that they had this big meeting and one person who's kind of like powerful on the team was sort of not sold on the title, but after the meeting, she found that the song was stuck in her head and she was like, maybe that's a good thing that this little kind of earworm might make me think of the book later. So I got to keep
a launch event with like Girl Scout cookies.
Oh, what? Would I give the book with Girl Scout cookies?
You should have had like a launch event with cookies.
I should have. Maybe I will for the paperback.
There you go.
I like that. Okay, so we all know, I think that if this lockdown has proven anything to us, it's that reading is the coolest escape, which we all already know, the audience already knows, or they wouldn't be here. But can you each tell us one thing about your book that makes it really timely, a timely read right now, or just a good quarantine read? Meghan, why don't you start first?
Yeah, I was worried you were gonna say that. My book is probably the least appropriate quarantine read possible because it's all about getting really cuddly and having these intimate physical moments with strangers. So if you're a real masochist and you really miss physical contact, my book would actually be a great book for you, but it's so opposite of this moment. But in other things I could recommend it, it's very escapist and talks of an easier time. I don't really know when tango's going to come back, honestly. The only news peg with my book right now would be that I think like half of the Spanish outbreak had to do with like one Italian tango dancer that spread it. So yeah, if you want to just some escapist moment away from the moment, but there's absolutely nothing politically relevant in the book whatsoever.
Actually,
it's all about touch.
Touch, exactly. I thought escapism and touch. And Melissa, I have to ask you because your book is set in China.
Yes. Yeah. And I do think, one of the things I worked really hard on the book with, and my editor helped me with, was really making Shanghai a full I think of it more as a character in the book than a setting. And so I think it is a good book if you want to travel right now, but can't go anywhere. The setting, I hope, of Shanghai really comes alive in the book. It's set in around 2003, 2004. And, you know, you're seeing the city from the perspective of foreigners who are there. My main character, Sasha, has lived there for 3 years and she speaks Chinese. So she has a little bit of an inside view. And then a newcomer, Liz, arrives in the city who does not know anything about Shanghai and is really unprepared to live there. And so we also see her kind of being completely overwhelmed by the setting. So yeah, it's good if you want to go on a fake vacation, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Elizabeth? What makes this a good read right now?
People have said that they didn't look at their phone when reading the book because they were too interested in knowing what would happen. So I feel like that's the best thing you could do, is not look at your phone for a while. For me, I'd, you know, not look at the news and not look at my phone even before this. It's a nice compliment, but certainly now the idea that you weren't tempted to look at your phone is very complimentary. And so I hope that others who don't want to look at their phone might pick it up.
The highest praise. Yes, I loved all of these books. So yeah, I would agree with that. Okay, another question that I think is interesting. I feel like people don't realize that as fiction writers and even as a memoirist, we actually have to do a lot of research. I don't know, Meghan, I hope you did. But you know,
Research.
what candy bar was popular in 2003 and what coffee shop is at the intersection of such and such, and all sorts of different random things. But do any of you have a good, like, something weird you had to research? How about you, Elizabeth? Did you have anything?
I think the most interesting thing for me to research was the Occupy Wall Street movement. I was not, in the book there is also like anti-war protests against the Iraq war, which I knew about a little bit already, but I knew about Occupy Wall Street as a reader of news, but I was interested in knowing what it would be like to be in Zuccotti Park. And I found it really interesting to research these activists and people who just walked out of their jobs and walked out of their lives and camped out for this moment and this movement. And then to also follow sort of what happened to some of those activists after they left the park. And this didn't all make it into the book, but I found it really interesting and unexpected. I didn't know I'd be spending so much time reading about Occupy Wall Street, but I enjoyed reading about it.
I get that. Yeah. It was really well depicted. And even though we all lived through it, it was neat. I felt like I was there. So what about you, Meghan? Did you have to research your life?
Yes, I mean, I ended up like reading through old emails and looking at old like live journal entries and asking questions about stuff. But I mean, for the most part, my book was a huge amount of research. It spiraled out of a research seminar that I did in graduate school. So it was just like soup to nuts, the history of Argentine tango. And I sort of set out to write it because there's not a lot of really deep analysis about tango. So a lot of people just go with the standard lines of it's like the vertical expression of a horizontal desire, and they're like, it started in the brothels of Buenos Aires, and all of that is sort of true, but it's also kind of facile. And I wanted to, you know, take a writer's treatment to what the real story was and the nuances and the complexities and stuff like that. And it led me down all these different roads, and I was, you know, going really deep into tango lyrics and the lives of musicians and, you know, the history of the founding of the country and the whitewashing of tango and also the whitewashing of the population. And it was, you know, like hugely fascinating. And then I ended up with whole things about tango in Finland, which is a massive thing that I had to cut from the book. So my whole life was research.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I love hearing these answers. How about you, Melissa? There's obviously a ton of research, right?
Well, so I'm not a natural researcher. It's not something I enjoy, but I moved to China. So that was like, that was my big research. I lived there for 6 months, and that's where I first conceived of the book. But that was back in 2003. And so then when I did find my publisher, and he wanted me to kind of expand on the descriptions of Shanghai, and it's like, well, I hadn't been there in 15 years. I couldn't really remember. So I did end up reading some like ethnographic research about the nightlife in Shanghai. And it, like, I read, you know, like going back through the history of the city, and I was particularly focused on the time period that my book was set in, but I did learn a lot of very interesting things about various eras in the city's history and how nightlife emerged and nightclub culture and the, you know, Americans who come in and open bars and things like that. So Not all of it made it into the book, of course, but it was an interesting kind of layer of history that I didn't even know when I was living there. So.
Ah, that is neat. That is neat. Okay, these are such heavy questions. Yeah. my research had more to do with like, when did REO Speedwagon write that song? A lot of
Also important research.
I got the title for this, right? You know, feels like the first time from the Foreigner song. I don't know what my childhood just came roaring back when I started writing. Probably because it's set in my home state. Anyways, let me ask you I hope it's an easier question. Okay, try to give a one-word answer. What is your weirdest personality trait or quirk that makes you a good writer? Okay, Elizabeth, go.
One word?
Like yeah.
It's a weird personality trait that makes me a good writer. I don't think it's weird, but sensitive.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll take it. Meghan.
I hate wearing makeup, so it's the perfect profession for me.
Oh.
I don't put makeup on to be rejected.
See, that's just charming. Okay, Melissa.
I love organizing things. I like bringing order to chaos, and I think that's for me what writing is as well.
Oh, nice. Mine is that I am obsessed with listening to things. So being a good listener is because I come from the background of music. Okay, interesting. Let's see. Oh, I have another one. You know, I feel like writers make the best people to suggest books. And every year I feel like I'm obsessed with a new author. Like I went through Curtis Sittenfeld, and right now Lauren Groff is my new favorite. But could you each please just suggest some current contemporary author that you would recommend to our audience out there today? Melissa, go ahead.
Lydia Yuknavitch.
She's so cool. Okay. Like just like exudes coolness. Okay.
Yeah.
How about you?
So I managed with 2 children under 2 to read Ducks Newburyport this year, which
Wow.
I would like a medal. And so in honor, it's like all I managed to do. You know, I couldn't really bathe, but I read Ducks Newburyport. And since it's the Newburyport Literary Festival, part of me read it to try to figure out what it had to do with Newburyport, which was not much, but it is a totally brilliant book. And now I can't talk about it with anyone because nobody else has read it because it's a 1,000-page single sentence. So that one is mind-blowingly wonderful. And what I'm reading right now, which I would recommend, is not out yet, and I don't remember exactly when it's coming out, but Lynn Strong's new novel, Wanted. I've got a galley of that, so keep a lookout for that one.
Ooh, are you blurbing that one? Are you going to write a quote for her?
No, she has way fancier people writing her blurbs, but I'm, you know, boosting it to you guys. You heard it here first.
Okay, awesome. I'll check that out. What about you, Elizabeth? Who's your favorite?
This year I was just like so obsessed with Helen Phillips, whose book The Need just took over my life when I read it. I just couldn't stop thinking about it and talking about it.
Don't start reading it at bedtime with small children in your house.
No, definitely. I had to quit. I was too scared, and then I took a break for like 6 months and then came back and I was ready. So it's so good. It's so unsettling. It's just, I can't get over it. But I also want to recommend Scorpionfish by Natalie Bakopoulos. It's coming out from Tin House Books in early July. So it's another, like, I read it in galley form, and it's just, I just want people to look out for it, because I feel like hopefully in July we'll be having readings in bookstores, but we don't know. So, and it's like a slim, potent book from a writer I love.
These are juicy suggestions. Okay, here's another fun one, because I don't know when we're going to be hit. We're getting a lot of questions that are waiting in line. Is there anything that you use to fuel your writing? You know, obvious stuff: coffee, bourbon, particular music, yoga, cuddling. I'm looking at you, Melissa. We'll explain later. So actually, Melissa, do you use anything in particular to fuel your writing?
Oh, anxiety?
Does that work for you? Okay, no, that's beautiful just by itself. Okay, Elizabeth.
Fuel my writing, I think I use like paying for childcare as fuel, and turning off the internet. Those are my biggest tips. Like, valuing my time more and closing my tabs on the internet when not researching.
You know, obvious but not obvious, and a way to be more efficient. Okay, Meghan, what do you use to fuel your writing?
Fear of Failure and Philip Glass.
Oh, Philip Glass.
Philip Glass. You heard it here. It's the best writing music in the world.
We're going to have to talk about that. Okay, that's really interesting. That's a wonderful answer. And by the way, she read Duck's Newburyport, so her answers are kind of off. That's awesome.
I'm so impressed. It's on my list, but.
I mean, I wrote a book, but guys, I read Duck's Newburyport.
Exactly. So another question I have is the proverbial book in the drawer. Maybe I'm projecting because I have a crappy book in my drawer that I wrote before I wrote Twine. And I really feel like for me, it was the best on-the-job training I've gotten in my life. I had to write a novel to learn how to write a novel. Do any of you have a secret or 5 secret novels in drawers anywhere? Elizabeth, do you?
I have a drawer novel, and I still feel like a lot of love and tenderness for it. So I don't even want to call it a drawer novel, but it is for now. So I see someone has been asking about publishing. I think that's a publishing related question. Like the drawer novel lives in the drawer because people didn't think they could sell it, and that's obviously a consideration if you want to publish a book, whether the book would sell or not. So that book lives in a drawer until such time that maybe I revisit it, or maybe it will live in a drawer forever. But it was, as you said, like a great education in how to write a book.
Right, exactly. Hey, Melissa.
I mean, Besotted was my drawer novel for a long time. That's what I thought it was. I thought nobody, like I tried to sell it, agents, and I got the same, agents didn't like my characters enough. They didn't learn enough lessons. The perspective was too strange. But yeah, I think it's partly with publishing, it's about finding the right audience for your book, and sometimes it needs a break. And I know when I came back and edited the book, I knew more about how to edit a novel in 2017, partly because I just spent a lot of time after I put it aside writing reviews and interviewing other authors as a way to do something else with my brain for a while. And then I think I came back to Besotted, and it's like, oh, I get why this didn't sell the first time. I'm glad it didn't sell the first time. And now I see what I need to do to bring it all together. So yeah, my drawer novel is out of the drawer.
Okay. What about you, Meghan?
Well, as a nonfiction writer, I feel a little embarrassed admitting this to all of you, but I actually have an unfinished murder mystery novel in the drawer, but I'm so terrified of writing fiction. And also there's a lot of, details to figure out that are hard if you don't know how, murder investigations work. So that's my secret shame. Stay tuned.
And I'm not sure if Leslie's going to come on right now, but I see some passionate audience members who do want to talk about publishing, as you said, Elizabeth.
I can't see any questions anywhere, just in case people think I'm ignoring them. I don't see any questions.
Yeah, so there are, we do have someone who would love to hear a little bit more about the process of publishing and how you all, how the book became a real thing.
Right. I think that's a great question. Well, let's start with you, Melissa, because yours is, the small press.
Yeah, I mean, so as I said, I did the round of agents. I did multiple rounds of agent submissions and edits in between. And I got, I kept revising when the feedback I got was consistent. So if I sent out to a batch of 10 agents and I got no's and they were all saying kind of the same reasons for the no's, then I would go back and revise. And by the time I decided to put Besotted aside, none of the feedback I was getting was consistent. I was hearing, from one agent, like, your structure is brilliant, but I don't like your characters. And then another agent was like, I loved these characters, but I did not understand what you were doing with the structure. So that's when I felt like I needed to take a break. And then I did come back to it and I started exploring small press publishing. And I think that's, so for people in the audience who don't know, small presses, many of them you submit to without an agent. You're not going to get a big advance. I got a $200 honorarium for my book. You don't have a huge team behind you. I hired my own publicist, freelance publicist, who was amazing, and she really helped me. But a lot of it is, you know, I planned my own book tour. I did all my own promotion. My publisher helped me, but he's just one person in Brooklyn and running a great press. He puts out about 5 books a year. So it's a different kind of publishing model, but it also feels like less pressure. There's not like, small presses can take risks on books that bigger presses can't, because they don't, you know, I sold, I think by last count, it was something like 330 copies of the book, and my publisher was thrilled, and he broke even, and I'm gonna get, you know, and it's like, that's a low bar. And if I was with a big 5 publisher and that's what my book did, it would be I don't think they'd be thrilled. So small publishing is a different kind of ecosystem, and it's one I've found is really supportive, and it's a lot about networking, but it is a lot about authors needing to be kind of savvy about the business end of the publishing as well. So, and that's something I really I'm kind of passionate about talking about.
Yeah.
Business support for authors, because I don't think there's enough of that out there.
Can I add something? Because you mentioned Lauren Groff, and you were talking about your events, and I thought it's really heartening. I read a tweet thread from her this year where she talked about never having sold enough copies domestically to earn out her advances. I mean, and she's like a National Book Award finalist. Barack Obama put her on his books he read that year, like New York Times, you know, she has all these accolades, and you think, I found it really reassuring. I'm like, if Lauren Groff isn't earning out her advance, then maybe I can put my feet up about earning out mine. I don't know. But I agree. I think it's helpful to sort of hear from a spectrum of possibilities. And I'd say for my publishing journey, I had the drawer novel that I mentioned, and I was just so demoralized by rejections for that drawer novel. And they started to feel kind of all over the place too. Like it wasn't, it just really shows you how subjective it is and how much timing plays into it, and the right reader at the right time, just like readers picking up books in the bookstore. Like, but I got my MFA and spent like 10 years working on this book that's in the drawer. And I was so demoralized. I'm like, I had started working on this other book, and it was so enjoyable to work on this other book. And it was so unenjoyable to read rejections for the drawer novel that I was like, I gotta shift my energies to this other book. And I did. And it was a much quicker process. It took a lot less time to write and a lot less time to find an agent and sell the book. So I don't know, I guess the takeaway for me was like that I felt like real joy working on the book that sold. I loved working on it. And I like to think that translated to other people enjoying reading it. And it made it feel better to kind of put the other one away for the moment.
That joy comes through. I definitely think that. Yeah, what about you, Meghan? What's your story?
I mean, very similar. But I just wanted to say that it's a tricky time right now to sell books. Like, I think we all sold books at a really tricky time, and the time is only getting trickier. So that kind of has to be said. I mean, if we had sold our books 10 years ago, you know, like people were just handing out 6-figure advances, and you'd have a 12-city book tour, and, you know, like these things were just automatic that they happened. And, you know, these days being what they are, and the administration being what it is, my publisher was very candid with me about just how much the 24-hour news cycle affects publishing decisions, and it affects readers' sort of attention spans, and how much books are being talked about, and the fact that small regional, not even large regional publications that do book reviews are being shut down, and corporate ownership is changing the way books are covered. And so like the window you have to have a quote unquote successful launch is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So like you kind of have to keep your eye on the prize and say, I already went to the Olympics. I already published a book. That's like, you got to just kind of be peaceful with that. And then the rest of it's kind of up to luck. It's really subjective, and it's, Melissa, you said you hired your own publicist. I wish I had done that myself. And surely if the universe grants me a second publishing deal for the book I'm working on now, I will definitely do that. Because even if you have, I mean, HMH is a pretty solid big publisher. And even if you're there, which I was, and it was a wonderful experience, and I had an amazing publicity team, the bandwidth that people in the publishing world have, and that the book world has, and the readership and like news coverage and stuff like that, it's so narrow these days that you really need to sort of just like hit the right track And it's so much luck and subjectivity that, like, you know, if you're doing this now as a debut author, and especially with this quarantine, we have no idea what the world's going to look like in 6 months. Just don't beat yourself up, and it's really, really hard. And, you know, trust that hopefully people will find your book and it'll go that way. But even if they don't, it's probably not your fault.
Yeah, and it's so unpredictable. I feel like there's always a reason that books don't, you know, people are trying to avoid the election as a publication time. No one obviously anticipated this moment. And I mean, I think when there's just always it's always hard for books to sort of like gain those eyeballs. I think when my book came out, like Margaret Atwood's new book came out, Stephen King's new book came out. It was like, who wants to talk about this book? Like everyone wants to talk about the Testaments, you know? So I think you can always find, there's always, I don't want to say an excuse, but there's always gonna be something that keeps people from reading about your book. So I
always a major author that drops on the same day that you do.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah. I have something to add because my story is more similar to Melissa's, but it's different a little bit than all of yours. And I think this is about before the publishing. You know, I had the book in the drawer, I submitted it to agents, and the uniformity of response I got crickets, I got silence with that first book. And, you know, I think it's our responsibility as authors to listen to that, not to sort of go, ugh. So when I wrote my next book, I started querying to agents, and I was getting rejections, but about 25%, I got 40 rejections. About 10 of them, I got positive responses complimenting my writers, my characters, the writing, and they liked it, but it wasn't the right time. Even some of the agents said to me, write me back with your next book, or, you know, not right now, maybe later. So when I submitted to the first small press, I really think that this, the editor there was the first person who read my entire book all the way through, wrote me right back, said he loved it, and picked it up. So just what Melissa said about hearing what people say, if this audience member asking about publishing is because they're attempting or they're in that phase of their writing, I would say really listen to the feedback you get, especially if there's that uniformity of response. So yes, and small publishers are great, and I got to keep my first title as well, Twine. So Leslie, how
time for one more quick question, which is I'd love to do a quick check-in, really quick, because we have 3 minutes left, on what you're working on now and if you have any projects in the mix.
Okay, who wants to go first?
I'll jump in. I'm working on a new novel that is set in a world much like our own, except that children are kidnapped with such regularity that it's hardly seen as a big deal anymore.
Whoa.
Love it.
Except, of course, to the parents who lose them.
Yeah.
That one.
Way to write a book for us mothers, yeah.
I told you, it's anxiety.
Megan, how about you? What are you working on? It's okay to say nothing.
Who, me?
Yeah, after reading Duck's new report, you must be exhausted.
I mean, I'm done. That's my whole life goal right there. No, I'm actually finishing a second draft, let's call it 1.5 of another memoir. It's not quite so breezy as the deplorable sexual decisions I made in my 20s and, you know, Argentine Tango, but it's I'm lovingly calling it the Dead Mother memoir.
Gotcha.
So,
okay. Wow. So every decade a new memoir for you, because you're...
God, no. Someone's gonna help me learn how to write a murder novel next, because I'm done talking about myself.
Nice. Well, you're interesting. So how about you, Elizabeth? What's next?
I'm working on another novel too, but it's hard to get into the groove at this moment for obvious reasons, I think. And until childcare becomes like a possibility again, I don't know how I'll finish it. But it's nice. It'll be nice to get to the moment where like working on it is an escape. Because I think all this publishing stuff, it did teach me too that was the best part for me. Apart from maybe the joy of learning that the book had sold, was finding how enjoyable it was to like get in the part of the book where you're just like really cooking and you're you have like the flow. So I want to get back to that part. I just want to do what I can to feel that again.
The fun part, yeah, exactly. And I'm writing a book about a prison escape, so a divergence as well.
Wow. Well, ladies, thank you all so much for being here as part of the first Newburyport Literary Festival Online. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all our participants. Sorry we didn't get to more questions, but again, we really appreciate you being here, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank
you.
Thank you.